All right, welcome everybody. This week we're moving into chapter 3 of the text, which focuses on the duties and responsibilities of public administrators. But real quick, I want to back up and just review some of the principles from last week. So if you'll remember from this table, we talked about how among public administrators, most of them turn to their sense of duty for their ethical reasoning. Okay, and we talked a little bit about why that is. We talked about public service motivation, that people who are drawn to the public sector and nonprofit sectors are drawn to the sense of public duty and service. And we talked about two different kinds of duty. So there's stage 4, if you remember stage 4 of the ethical reasoning, which comes from a sense of duties that are imposed upon us from external sources, right? And then we also have the stages, stage 5, stage 6 kind of duty, which is a duty to our own internalized sense of values, things that we are personally committed toward. Okay. But today, what we're going to do, so we'll get to the stage 5 and stage 6 maybe a little later this week. But today, we're going to be focusing mainly on the basics, that stage 4 sense of duty. So remember, at this conceptual level, what is a duty? Well, it's basically the behaviors that are expected of persons who take on certain roles. They're the obligations that are imposed upon you when you enter into certain kind of profession. From a real narrow view, you could view it as like the restricted range of actions. Like it is my duty to do X, okay? And I can't do anything else. And so these are imposed upon you by some kind of outside source. And so when we're talking about public administration, whether in government agencies or nonprofit organizations, there are specific duties that role, that profession imposes upon you that can inform your ethical reasoning. And it manifests itself in a sense of duty. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what the duties of a public administrator are. What duties are imposed upon you by the profession itself? Again, we're not talking about like your internalized values, we're talking about the profession largely. So let's start here. So this is the OECD countries. They publish a list of values that these OECD countries value in their public service. They're public administrators. These are the values that they list. And in parentheses here is how many countries cited this value. So you have impartiality, legality, integrity, transparency, efficiency, equality, responsibility, and justice. These are pretty grandiose terms, right? That seem very important for a public administrator to value. So when you come to work each day as a public administrator, this is what's expected of you from the public. They're expecting you to take to have a sense of duty towards each of these values. Okay. Another source, this is from a source called the Independent Sector. This was in 2004. They named a number of values in the same sense, but they're a little bit broader or not just so simplistic. So a commitment to the public good, accountability to the public, commitment beyond the law. So not just legality, but going beyond the law to do what is right. Respect for the worth and dignity of the individuals, inclusiveness and social justice, respect for pluralism and diversity. Again, transparency, integrity, and honesty, responsible stewardship of resources. So not just a use of resources, but a stewardship, taking ownership of those resources and using them wisely. And then a commitment to excellence and to maintaining public trust. Again, these are pretty grandiose, like they make you feel like all warm and fuzzy inside, right? They're important values that we expect our public servants to engage in. And then you also have from this is officially the standards of ethical conduct for employees of the executive branch, okay? The core value that's set up for the standards of ethical behavior for those working in the executive branch of the government, putting the public interest over self-interest. So if you were to take all of those values that we've just talked about from all these different sources, it really could be boiled down to perhaps just this one value: putting the public interest over self-interest. And this is really what defines a public administrator from an administrator or manager in the private sector. In the private sector, self-interest is what drives the private sector in the free market, right? It's expected to be the driving force. Whereas all of a sudden in the public realm, the public administrator is expected to put that off and to put the public interest ahead of their own. Much harder to do in practice, right? This is easier said than done. So essentially what we're saying here is that there's a higher standard for public administrators, a higher ethical standard. So if you think back to one of our first discussions about the difference between public and private organizations, one of the key distinctions is that public organizations are subjected to a much higher level of scrutiny. They're in the public eye. When you're a public administrator, people pay much more attention to your actions than they would if you were just working for a private company, okay? And so the way that this manifests itself is that in contrast to the private sector, public administrators are often required to not use the public office for personal gain or to advance personal or private interests. In some ways, that seems crazy, right? In the private sector, it's all about advancing your career, advancing your self-interest, getting a raise, getting a promotion, right? All of these things are about advancing our own need. That's what drives it. And now all of a sudden in the public sector, you're expected to be able to put all of that aside and solely work for the public, okay? And it even goes further than that. It's not just that you have to put those interests to the side, it's that you can't even have the appearance of indiscretion. So it's not just that you shouldn't do wrong, it's that you shouldn't even look as if you're doing wrong, right? To not even give them the idea that there could possibly be something going on. So we have this really high standard that's set for public administrators, which is kind of daunting, right? The purpose of this class is to try and help us understand and manage that situation a little bit better, okay? No matter where you go to work, private, nonprofit, public sector, ethical behavior is hard, right? We're all going to be placed in ethical dilemmas in which we have to decide what to do. But it's especially hard in the public eye because of this high level of scrutiny. You don't want to make a mistake when the entire public and the news media is constantly focused on you. Okay, so the text comes up with about 8 different case studies. Really neat part of this chapter this week. You get a lot of practice, and in the discussion post, you'll get some more practice to do this yourself, to go through some of these. But let's go through just a couple of these together. So case 3.1, titled Weekend Outing. The board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce has an annual weekend outing at a resort some miles from your city. During the weekend, there is golf, tennis, swimming, card games, dinner, dances with entertainment, and numerous cocktail parties. During the day, there are sessions at which the Chamber Board reviews progress for the past year and discusses plans for the upcoming year. For several years, the city has contributed $100,000 annually for the support of the Chamber. You, the city manager, are invited to the Chamber's weekend outing with all expenses paid by the Chamber. Do you accept the invitation and go for the weekend? Okay, let's break this down a little bit. So on the one hand, on the pros side of this, the Chamber of Commerce is a very important actor to the community, right? This would be a very important thing for the city manager to do. What's more, the free ticket, the all expenses paid, when compared to the $100,000 per year that the city is offering the Chamber of Commerce, it's relatively small, right? And so as the public manager, really, you should be attending and interacting with these professionals. These are all the business professionals of the city. It's geared towards economic development. There would be a lot of large benefits for the city from your attending. On the con side, on the contrary, there definitely is the chance that this could be perceived as an inappropriate personal gain and a conflict of interest. It could look as if you are using your position as the city manager to get luxury goods. And it could also, what's more important, one level deeper, it could create an undesirable obligation to the manager on behalf of the chamber. The manager needs to be able to maintain objectivity. So years down the road, if the manager needs to cut that spending or needs to take action against the chamber for behaviors that are not in line with what the city needs, the manager may find themselves, if they've taken and accepted all these gifts year after year, they could find themselves in a place where they feel like they can't be objective. They can't make the decision that they need to in this situation. Okay, so we see the dilemma here. There are some clear benefits from attending. However, this is a clear conflict of interest and can create some real bad ethical things down the road. So what is a potential solution? Well, it's possible to attend the event, but have the city cover the cost. Instead of the chamber giving it all inclusive, have the city office pay for it. If attending is really that valuable to go, it's worth the investment. So yeah, it'd be nice to be able to say, look, I don't have to foot the bill for this, but at the end of the day, footing the bill is worth not having the potential perception of indiscretion and conflict of interest or obligation trap that might come down the road. Okay, let's look at one more. So this is case study 3.3, a free donut. For some time, police officers on 3 adjacent beats have met each day for a coffee break at a restaurant near a point where the 3 beats intersect. They usually have coffee and a donut and occasionally a piece of pie. You are newly assigned to one of the beats. When you go for the coffee break the first day and you walk up to pay the check, the proprietor says, "No charge. I'm glad to have you officers around." The others leave without paying. Do you pay your check? Okay, let's break this down a little bit. So again, on the pro side, this is really could be understood as a sincere expression of gratitude. And if we were to reject that, what would the owner, the proprietor, think of your behavior? You think that no good cop just turned down like a really sincere, grateful offer? What a jerk, right? It could be bad for the perception of the police force altogether, especially if this has been happening frequently with everybody else in the group, right? If everybody's been doing this, that could be a problem. And then the other thing to consider is this happens all the time for celebrities or for friends and families of the owner. In fact, I was just watching, I don't know if any of you watch Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld, but like when he goes in with these other comedians to these coffee shops and stuff, the owners come out all the time. They're like, "Hey, it's on the house. Here's all these like special things for you." Celebrities get this all the time and they do it for friends and family, right? There's nothing that's like unusual or huge about this, right? What's more, it's a donut. It costs like a couple dollars. We're not talking about something like an all expenses paid trip like in the last situation. It's a donut, right? So what really is at issue here? Well, yes, there's this idea that you're getting a personal gain, right? Because of the position that you hold that other people don't have access to. So you're probably abusing that to a certain extent. Again, it's very small. But the more important issue here is the sense of entitlement that the officers all were starting to have towards this shop. So they'd go to the same shop very routinely, and they expected that it would be given freely to them. And so what this does is it gives a perception to everybody else in that restaurant that the cops are above the rules. They don't have to play by the same rules as everyone else. They get special treatment, right? You can see how that would be perceived as dishonest. Once again, the restaurant owner is saying essentially, "I like you being here. I get benefits from you being here." Well, if you're constantly there at that restaurant and not rotating around to different restaurants, none of the other restaurants get the special treatment that you're giving that restaurant. When you're there, the presence and safety that you bring to that restaurant is not being afforded to anybody else. And so really you're playing favorites. Okay. So you can see that there's some issues there, right? This seems pretty small, but taken to an extreme, this could create some of those bad obligations and perceptions that we're trying to avoid. So what's a potential solution? Well, switch up the location frequently. Go to a different place each day. It's probably okay to accept an occasional uh, genuine gesture of gratitude, right? Especially when they're small. In fact, for most public employees, there's actually a dollar limit. So if you work for the federal government, there's literally a dollar limit. It's something pretty cheap. I want to say it's somewhere between like 20 and 40 bucks. That if it goes over that, if the gift that's given to you is over that, you cannot accept it. It's illegal, and you have to report all of the gifts that you've been given throughout the year and show that like none of this has happened, right? So an occasional small gesture is fine. Don't allow it to become a regular thing. Don't let it to become develop into a sense of entitlement. Okay, that's where the big problem is here. Okay, so the purpose of this is a shorter lecture here, but the purpose of today's class is again to focus on that stage 4 level of duty. What is the field, the profession of public administration impose upon you? What are your duties to the profession of public administration? And to see how that is going to be different in the public sector than it is in the private sector. It has a higher ethical standard, a higher expectation. Okay. And so I want to finish with what I consider the fundamental question of duty. Okay. If you're wanting to impose this stage 4 level of reasoning, ask yourself this question. Given my role as a public administrator, how am I expected to behave here? Now, hopefully, as we continue our discussion, there will be more questions that are based on virtue and consequences and social contract and all these other kinds of things. But if you're wanting to understand a sense of duty from your profession, ask yourself, given the fact that I am a public administrator, given my role, what's expected of me in this role? That should help inform at least part of the decision. Sometimes it informs everything is expected of you. But at the bare minimum, it will give you somewhat of a compass to guide you in the right direction. Okay, best of luck with the discussion board and the activities below, and we'll see you come next week.